Chapter 1. The diagnosis. The room was cold. Sterile white walls, a humming fluorescent light above, and the faint scent of antiseptic thick in the air. Jonathan Morrison sat upright in the stiff-backed chair, his hands resting calmly on his lap. His sharp gray eyes that had once stared down death in foreign lands, were steady as ever, even as the doctor across from him cleared his throat. "I'm afraid it's terminal, Mr. Morrison," the doctor said, glancing down at the manila folder on the desk before meeting Jonathan's gaze. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's already metastasized to the liver. Given its progression, you have at most 6 months. "I'm sorry." Jonathan didn't flinch. No tears. No curse. He simply inhaled slowly, as if tasting the very words. 6 months, he repeated, his voice steady low, like gravel sliding down a slope. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once disarmed bombs and written classified reports. They looked no different now, calm, controlled. "That's generous." The doctor shifted uncomfortably. "We can discuss palliative care, pain management, perhaps some experimental treatments to ease the symptoms." Jonathan raised one hand, palm outward. "That won't be necessary." The doctor faltered, then nodded. He'd seen many reactions, but this unnerved him. As Jonathan stood, he adjusted his cufflinks, ever the picture of military discipline even in civilian clothes. His suit was dark, clean, but modest. He didn't believe in luxury, not anymore. Outside, the hospital waiting room buzzed with low conversations and the soft beep of machines. But seated near the windows, Diana, his wife of 28 years, sat scrolling through her phone, her manicured nails tapping impatiently on the glass. She was dressed elegantly, too elegantly for a hospital visit, with gold jewelry that glimmered under the lights and a silk scarf tied neatly around her neck. Beside her sat Lydia and Ryan. Lydia, their 30-year-old daughter, was tapping away at her tablet, muttering something about quarterly reports and promotion deadlines. Ryan, 2 years younger, lounged with his legs sprawled out, scrolling through stock market apps, his designer watch glinting as he moved. Jonathan approached, his footsteps measured, quiet. They barely looked up. "Well?" Diana asked, not lifting her eyes from the phone. 6 months, Jonathan replied simply. Diana blinked, then gave a small, tight nod, as if confirming an expected shipment delay. 6 months, she repeated under her breath. Her lips curled, but it wasn't sorrow, it was calculation. Her eyes flickered toward Lydia and Ryan. "Well, that's unfortunate." Lydia let out a low whistle, her brow barely furrowing. 6 months, huh? That's soon. She didn't look up from her tablet. Ryan leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. "Damn, I thought we'd have more time." "No offense, Dad." Jonathan's gaze narrowed, but he said nothing. Diana finally put her phone down and folded her arms across her chest. "Jonathan, darling," she began, her voice sugary sweet, but laced with a hard edge. "You know, this does complicate things. We'll need to get your affairs in order quickly." "My affairs?" Jonathan asked, his tone even unreadable. She nodded, tilting her head in mock concern. "Your will, your accounts, the house? It would be a shame to leave everything in chaos after you're gone. You wouldn't want that burden to fall on me, or the kids." Lydia finally looked up, her eyes sharp behind thick mascara. "Yeah, Dad, I mean, it's not just about you anymore. We got lives to manage. Responsibilities. Mortgages. You always said you wanted to make sure we're taken care of." Ryan nodded eagerly. "Exactly. And no offense, but dragging it out with lawyers after you're gone? That's messy. We should settle everything now. Smooth transition, you know?" Jonathan's gaze shifted between them, studying their faces, dissecting every word like he had done with enemy informants in a war zone. He had always suspected the rot, but now it showed plainly under fluorescent lights. Diana leaned in, her perfume thick and cloying. "And Jonathan, darling, since we're being honest, I think it's time we face facts. We've been living separate lives for years." Her eyes flickered with something smug, something satisfied. "I've already spoken with my attorney. I've filed for divorce. No hard feelings, of course. It's amicable." Lydia gave a small laugh under her breath. Ryan smirked. Jonathan didn't blink. I see, he said, voice like ice melting slowly. Diana's lips curved upward. You'll still have your time, of course. 6 months is plenty, but we need to ensure everything is settled neatly. Lydia tapped her tablet again, nodding toward Jonathan's briefcase. Dad, just to make it easier, we can help you review everything. The insurance, stocks, retirement accounts. No point waiting until the last minute. Ryan chuckled. Yeah, we wouldn't want anything lost in the shuffle. Jonathan looked at them all, his wife, his children, and what stared back at him wasn't family. It was a pack of vultures, circling a meal that hadn't gone cold yet. Diana smiled, eyes sparkling with false warmth. We all just want what's best, Jonathan. For everyone. The air grew heavier with their words. Outside, rain began to patter against the hospital windows, soft and steady. Jonathan remained silent, his face unreadable, his heartbeat calm and even. Diana leaned back, satisfied by his quiet compliance. She tucked her phone into her purse with a finality that made her diamonds flash under the lights. After all, she said softly, her voice almost tender as she glanced toward the door, it's time we all start moving on. Jonathan didn't speak. He simply watched, and they smiled. Chapter 2. The Betrayal Unveiled. The rain had turned relentless in the days following the diagnosis, drumming against the windows of the Morrison estate like a constant, mocking reminder. Jonathan sat in the dimly lit study, the fire casting flickers of amber light across the walls lined with books and relics from his years in military service. His fingers traced the edge of an old medal on his desk, a small comfort in a world that seemed to be shrinking by the hour. 6 months. That was the number that loomed over him. But even that didn't weigh as heavily as what he had begun to suspect. The house was no longer quiet when he was near. Whispers stopped as soon as he entered the room. Diana's phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now clutched to her chest like a shield. Lydia and Ryan, who had once called for his advice, now exchanged knowing glances when they thought he wasn't watching. He hadn't spent decades in military intelligence to ignore such signals. Late one night, when the house had settled into uneasy sleep, Jonathan sat alone in his study, the glow of the computer screen illuminating his sharp features. He moved with precision, his fingers dancing over the keyboard, tracking patterns, phone calls, messages, financial statements. Then he found it. Troy Whitman, a name that popped up repeatedly. Transfers from Diana's account to Troy's business under the guise of consulting services. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. He remembered Troy from charity events, sleek suits, gelled hair, a manufactured grin. A businessman with more charm than integrity. His name had surfaced in whispers around town, risky ventures, gambling debts, connections to questionable investors. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, breathing in deeply. She was funding him. With another few keystrokes, Jonathan cracked open the hidden phone logs. Calls. Hundreds of them. Texts that weren't even subtle. Can't wait to be free. Soon we'll have everything. 6 months isn't so long, love. Jonathan's jaw clenched, but he kept his calm. He knew rage was useless. Only clarity mattered. The betrayal wasn't just Diana's. Attached to some of the messages were forwarded emails from Lydia and Ryan. Jonathan's own children had been sending financial updates, property valuations, bank account summaries directly to their mother and Troy. Lydia's message was crystal clear. Dad will be gone before the year ends. We should move on this before the market shifts. Ryan's reply followed. Agreed. No reason to delay. I'll get the paperwork ready. Jonathan sat still, letting the weight of it all press down on him. His family had been carving up his life as if he were already in the ground. In the following days, he watched them closely, gathering more than enough evidence while they remained blissfully unaware. Diana had stopped pretending entirely. She came and went with an air of confidence, humming softly as she scrolled through text messages with a smile. One afternoon, Jonathan stood at the kitchen entrance, unseen, as she laughed softly into her phone. Oh, Troy, she purred, swirling her wine glass. Soon everything will be ours. I've waited long enough. He won't even fight it. You should have seen him at the hospital, so pitiful. She giggled, taking a sip. Lydia and Ryan are already on board, she continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction. They'll handle the logistics. Honestly, I think they're more eager than I am. Once Jonathan's out of the way, we'll have access to everything. The house, the accounts, all of it. Jonathan stepped back into the shadows, every word burning itself into his mind. Later that evening, during a staged family dinner, the atmosphere was thick with false civility. Diana sat at the head of the table, glass of red wine in hand, smiling like a queen awaiting her coronation. Lydia and Ryan exchanged subtle smirks, their plates barely touched. Jonathan ate slowly, methodically, watching every glance, every twitch. "So, Dad," Ryan began casually, setting down his fork with a clink, "Mom mentioned you've been looking at care facilities. Smart move, you know. Given everything." Diana's eyes gleamed. "Yes, Jonathan. It's something we should all discuss together. A peaceful place. Somewhere comfortable. You've worked hard all your life. You deserve rest." Lydia nodded eagerly, her voice syrupy sweet. "We even did some research for you. There's this lovely place just outside the city. It's affordable, but the reviews are decent." Jonathan's eyes flicked to her. "Affordable," he echoed, his voice steady. Lydia grinned, oblivious to the weight behind his words. "Yes, no point wasting money on something extravagant, right? You always said we should be practical." Ryan chimed in, grinning. "Exactly. Plus, it'll give you time to, reflect. Rest up. Enjoy the memories." Diana reached across the table, placing her perfectly manicured hand over Jonathan's. "We're only thinking of what's best for you, darling. A place where you'll be cared for, peacefully." Jonathan remained motionless, letting her hand linger there like a spider resting on its web. "And of course," she continued smoothly, "while you're there, we can handle everything else. The house, the finances, your will, no need for you to stress." Lydia smiled brightly. "We've already scheduled some meetings with lawyers. Just preliminary stuff. We'll take care of it." Ryan laughed softly. "Yeah, you won't have to lift a finger. We got it covered." Jonathan's eyes moved slowly around the table, locking onto each of them in turn. He could see it in their faces, the greed, the relief, the triumph. They believed they had already won. Diana's tone turned soft, almost pitying. "Don't fight this, Jonathan. It's for your comfort, your peace." Jonathan's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, so slight it almost wasn't there. Inside, however, a storm began to rise. But he said nothing. He simply nodded once, a gesture as calm as a man accepting his fate. And they smiled. Chapter 3. Abandoned with Memories. The rain had stopped by the time Jonathan's family arrived at the nursing home. It was a bleak building, worn down by time and neglect, its cracked brick facade streaked with water stains. The windows were clouded with grime, and a rusty sign out front read in faded letters, "Maple Ridge Extended Care Facility." There was nothing inviting about it, not the peeling paint, nor the crooked wheelchair ramp at the entrance. Diana sat in the front passenger seat of her luxury SUV, filing her nails as if she were preparing for brunch, not dropping off her dying husband. Troy Whitman sat behind the wheel, wearing sunglasses even though the sky was still overcast. His smug expression barely shifted as he chewed gum, tapping the steering wheel to some silent rhythm. In the back seat, Lydia scrolled through her phone while Ryan absent-mindedly adjusted his designer cufflinks, looking bored. Jonathan sat beside Lydia, holding a plain cardboard box on his lap, light enough to carry with one hand, yet somehow heavier than anything he'd held in years. Inside it were old photos, a few letters, and a small collection of mementos from his military career. No clothes, no personal care items, just remnants of a life now deemed disposable. "Are we there yet?" Lydia muttered, not looking up. Troy pulled up to the curb, shifting the gear into park with a loud click. "This is it," Diana announced, slipping her phone into her purse and adjusting her sunglasses. "Cozy little place." Jonathan's eyes flicked toward the building, but said nothing. Troy popped open the rear door. "All right, old man. Time to check in." Lydia gave an exaggerated sigh. "Let's get this over with." Ryan leaned over, unbuckling Jonathan's seatbelt with a sharp snap. "Come on, Dad. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Jonathan stepped out slowly, box in hand, his movements deliberate, composed. His feet met the cracked pavement with quiet finality. Diana emerged gracefully, brushing imaginary dust off her designer coat. "Remember, Jonathan," she said sweetly, her voice dripping with false kindness, "this is for your own good. They'll take excellent care of you here." Her words echoed mockingly against the cold, empty parking lot. The group made their way inside, the automatic doors groaning as they slid open. The lobby smelled of antiseptic and old fabric, with flickering fluorescent lights casting a harsh, unnatural glow over everything. A weary-looking receptionist glanced up from behind a thick plexiglass screen. Diana strutted up to the counter. "We're here to admit my husband," she announced, her tone brisk. "Jonathan Morrison." The receptionist barely glanced at the paperwork she'd been handed earlier. "Room 109, she muttered, pressing a button that unlocked a door down the hall. Troy gave a mock salute and grabbed the handle of Jonathan's wheelchair, which had been brought out by an orderly. "No need," Jonathan said quietly, stepping forward under his own power. Troy chuckled, but let him walk. They reached room 109, a small, musty chamber that looked more like a storage closet than a living space. A thin, metal-framed bed sat against the wall. The window overlooked the back alley where garbage bins overflowed. A single chair sat in the corner, its upholstery stained and fraying. "Well," Diana said, surveying the room with thinly veiled disgust, "it's quaint." Lydia wrinkled her nose. "God, it smells like mothballs and death." Ryan chuckled under his breath. "Fitting." Jonathan placed his box on the nightstand without a word, then turned to face them. Diana, satisfied with the charade of civility, turned toward the door. "We've done all we can, Jonathan," she said with a dramatic sigh. "I hope you'll find peace here." She turned and, without hesitation, pressed her lips to Troy's in a long, lingering kiss, right in front of him. Jonathan watched, unblinking, as they kissed. Diana's fingers trailed along Troy's lapel, her laughter soft and intimate. Troy grinned smugly at Jonathan over Diana's shoulder. "Don't wait up, old man." Lydia gave a mocking little wave. "Good luck, Dad. Try to. Enjoy yourself." Ryan snorted, already heading for the door. "Yeah, don't do anything crazy." Diana paused at the threshold, casting Jonathan one last smile. "Enjoy the memories," she said pointedly, glancing at the box of photos before slipping her arm into Troy's. Without another word, they left, their laughter echoing down the hall as their heels clicked away on the tile. Silence filled the room like a thick fog. Jonathan stood alone, staring at the closed door for a moment, then calmly turned back toward the bed. He sat down slowly, surveying the sparse room, the chipped paint, the cracked dresser, the water-stained ceiling. From the hallway, muted sounds drifted in, distant coughs, the squeak of a cart's wheels, soft murmurs of nurses. Minutes passed before the door creaked open again. A nurse entered, young but worn by the job, her brown hair pulled into a messy bun under her cap. She glanced at Jonathan, a little surprised to see him sitting so straight, so still. "You settled in okay?" she asked, wheeling in a tray of medications and paperwork. Jonathan nodded once, his expression unreadable. She hesitated, studying him with quiet curiosity. There was something different about this man, something almost regal in his bearing, despite the surroundings. He wasn't like the others here. "I saw them leave," she said softly, glancing toward the door. "Not exactly the warmest send-off." Jonathan gave the faintest of smiles, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I've had colder receptions." The nurse gave a small, knowing laugh. She tucked the clipboard under her arm and reached into her pocket, pulling out an old smartphone with a cracked screen. "Policy says no outside calls without clearance," she said, voice lowering conspiratorially, "but something tells me you don't care much about policies." Jonathan looked at her for a long, measured moment. "I don't," he said quietly. She handed him the phone, her eyes steady, respectful in a way that surprised him. "One call," she said simply. Jonathan's fingers curled around the phone, his touch deliberate. His gaze sharpened, not with desperation, but with calm purpose. The nurse watched as he dialed a number from memory, each button press slow and precise. He raised the phone to his ear. "Just one call," the nurse repeated, more to herself than him, watching as something unspoken shifted in the air. Jonathan's voice was low and steady as he spoke into the receiver. The nurse didn't ask whom he was calling. She just stood there, sensing something had changed in the room, something irrevocable. And outside, the rain began again. Chapter 4. The call that changed everything. The phone felt heavy in Jonathan's hand, its cracked plastic surface pressing against his weathered palm. He sat in the corner of the room, away from the flickering ceiling light that left half the walls cloaked in shadow. The nurse had long since left, shutting the door behind her with a quiet click. The soft hum of distant television sets echoed faintly through the hallways. Somewhere down the corridor, a patient coughed, wet and labored, but Jonathan didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed on the screen of the phone, where the numbers glowed faintly. He hadn't dialed this number in over 15 years. A number not stored in any device, but carved into his memory with the same precision as the coordinates of every battlefield he'd ever walked. Slowly, he began to dial. Each digit pressed carried weight, as though unlocking something ancient, something that had been waiting in the dark, untouched, but never forgotten. 5209371. His breath was steady, his heartbeat calm. The phone rang once, twice. Then, on the third ring, there was a click, followed by a brief burst of static. A voice came through, low and rough, with the unmistakable gravel of Eastern Europe layered beneath every word. "This line is dormant," the voice said in Russian accented English. "State your designation." Jonathan's lips curled ever so slightly. "Designation. Spectre 01, Jonathan said evenly. Silence. Then, a sharp inhale from the other side. "Jonathan Morrison," the voice muttered, disbelief woven into the words like thread. "I thought you were dead." "Soon enough," Jonathan replied coolly. "But not today." Another pause. Then the voice shifted, becoming sharper, more alert. "Authentication," the voice demanded. Jonathan's voice was like steel. "Black sand. Operation Nightglass. Secondary key. Warsaw Dusk." The line went dead for a split second. Then another voice came on, this one warmer but equally dangerous. "Spectre 01. The man greeted, his tone now respectful. "It has been a long time, my friend." Jonathan allowed a faint exhale of recognition. "Konstantin Petrov." Petrov's laugh was low, like the rumble of a distant storm. "I never thought I would hear your voice again." "You were always my last call, Konstantin," Jonathan replied, leaning back in the chair, staring at the cracked ceiling. "I've come to collect." Silence, thick and knowing. "I assumed this day might come," Petrov said softly, his voice more somber now. "Tell me what is required." Jonathan's eyes glimmered, cold and focused. "Operation Nemesis," he said simply, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. On the other end, Petrov let out a slow whistle. "You never did like half measures." "I don't have time for half measures," Jonathan said flatly. Petrov chuckled under his breath. "Ah, yes. I heard whispers, rumors of your condition. Terminal, they say." Jonathan's lips barely twitched. 6 months, give or take." There was a beat of silence. Then, Petrov spoke with quiet reverence. "I am sorry," he said, his words oddly sincere. "You deserve more." Jonathan's tone remained steady. "I had more than enough. Now I need closure." "Targets?" Petrov asked, already slipping into the clipped, efficient cadence of a man preparing for war. Jonathan's voice lowered as he began to speak, not with rage, not with grief, but with the precise detachment of a soldier briefing his comrade. "Primary," Jonathan said calmly. "Diana Morrison. Wife. Current financial assets hidden in joint shell accounts under Whitman Group Holdings. Connections to IRS audit flags and offshore investments flagged under Patriot Act parameters." "Understood," Petrov said immediately. "Asset removal or legal incapacitation?" "Both," Jonathan replied, his voice sharp as a blade. I want her life dismantled. Slowly, Petrov hummed approvingly. Ah, the old dance of suffering. Secondary target, Jonathan continued, without pause. Troy Whitman, known as the Prince in local circles. Real estate fraud, money laundering through auto dealership front, links to Eastern European gambling syndicates. Vulnerable to DEA and IRS intervention. Petrov's amusement was audible. Delightful filth. This one will fall quickly. Jonathan's tone never shifted. I want him alive long enough to understand everything was taken by his own greed. Of course, Petrov replied, jotting notes in the background. The faint scratch of pen on paper came through the phone, methodical and unhurried. Third and fourth targets, Jonathan added, his voice growing colder, Lydia Morrison and Ryan Morrison. Both engaged in workplace financial fraud and insider trading. No criminal records, but ample digital evidence on private cloud accounts. Subtle pressure, white-collar investigations, asset freezes, reputation destruction. I want them ruined before they even see it coming. Petrov's breath whistled through the receiver in appreciation. A family affair, then. Jonathan's eyes darkened. They left me to die. All of them. And now you'll let them see what it's like to rot from the inside out. Petrov said softly, almost admiringly. Very well. Operation Nemesis will commence. He paused, then asked in a quieter voice. Are you certain, old friend? Once we begin, there is no return. These aren't operations we can bury under a rug. Jonathan's reply was immediate, cold, and final. Execute, he said. No mercy. There was no hesitation in Petrov's reply. Understood. I'll activate my remaining cells. Legal pressure, digital warfare, asset infiltration. I'll begin assembling proxies for the necessary paperwork. No direct fingerprints. By the time they realize, it'll be far too late. Jonathan let the words sink in, feeling them settle into the bones of the room. It will be done, Petrov said after a moment. And it will be beautiful. Jonathan's lips curled into the faintest shadow of a smile, the first genuine one in weeks. Good, he said, his voice steady as stone. Let them choke on it. Petrov chuckled darkly. Spectre 01, it will be my honor to watch the world burn with you one last time. Likewise, Konstantin. The line fell silent for a long second. Then Petrov spoke in a soft, familiar way, a phrase shared long ago in darker places, whispered among men who'd stared death in the face together. Night falls fast, old wolf. Jonathan's reply was equally quiet. Then let them drown in darkness. The line clicked as Petrov disconnected. Jonathan lowered the phone slowly, resting it on the table beside him. His face remained calm, his posture relaxed, but his eyes, they burned with the cold, focused intensity of a man who had already buried the dead. Outside the window, the rain had stopped again. The night was thick, still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. And far across the sea, wheels were already turning. Operation Nemesis had begun. Chapter 5. The Web Titans. The storm began quietly. 3 days after Jonathan's phone call, life for Diana, Troy, Lydia, and Ryan carried on without a hint of awareness that the ground beneath them was starting to shift. Diana sat in her sunlit office at Vital Essence Fitness and Wellness, her pristine desk adorned with scented candles and gold-framed photos of tropical vacations with Troy. She was dressed in her usual pristine white suit, scrolling through client membership renewals, humming softly. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her rhythm. Her assistant, Chloe, peeked in, looking pale. Mrs. Morrison, there are people here to see you. Diana arched a brow. Clients? Tell them to make an appointment. Chloe swallowed nervously. They're not clients. They're with the IRS. Diana froze, the air in the room thickening instantly. Before she could respond, two stern-looking agents appeared at the door, badges in hand. Mrs. Diana Morrison? The taller one asked. Yes, she replied, her voice tight. We need to review your financial records, the agent said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Immediate compliance is required. Excuse me. Diana stood, her tone sharp and defensive. This isn't optional, the second agent added. We have warrants for all business and personal accounts connected to Vital Essence Fitness and Wellness. The taller agent placed a thick stack of documents on her desk, including offshore transactions. Diana's mouth went dry. I'll have my lawyer present, she stammered, scrambling for her phone. You're welcome to call your attorney, the agent replied coolly, already flipping through her files. But we're freezing your accounts effective immediately. Any attempt to move funds will be considered obstruction. Diana's carefully composed facade cracked as her hands trembled. What is this? She whispered, her voice breaking. Routine audit, the agent said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Triggered by multiple red flags, unreported revenue streams, suspicious consulting fees paid to foreign accounts. As they began their inspection, Chloe watched from the doorway, wide-eyed. But it wasn't over. Within hours, news spread through the staff like wildfire. Employees began resigning. 3 instructors by noon, the head of nutrition services by evening. By the next day, more than half her workforce had walked out, citing ethical concerns after an anonymous leak revealed internal emails about tax evasion and misuse of wellness grants. Diana watched helplessly as her once thriving business began to crumble, her phone buzzing with panic calls from investors and board members demanding answers. In her desperation, she dialed Troy. We have a serious problem, she hissed as soon as he picked up. I've got my own damn problems right now, Troy growled. He wasn't exaggerating. At that very moment, Troy's once luxurious office at Whitman Prestige Auto was swarmed by state regulators and angry customers. His receptionist stood frozen as 3 uniformed men walked through the front doors, accompanied by an attorney carrying a thick leather case. Troy Whitman, the lead investigator, called out, loud enough for the entire showroom to hear. Troy stormed out of his glass office, face flushed. Yeah, what's this about? State Compliance Bureau, the investigator announced. We're here regarding multiple violations, title fraud, illegal financing schemes, and tampering with odometer readings. Gasps echoed through the dealership floor. This is bullshit, Troy snapped, trying to push past them. One of the investigators held up a court order. We've received complaints from over 24 customers in the last 48 hours, along with evidence from whistleblowers inside your business. Troy's face blanched. Whistleblowers. An employee from his finance department stood nearby, refusing to meet his eye. Mr. Whitman, your dealership is under immediate suspension pending investigation, the investigator continued. Additionally, civil lawsuits are already underway from customers claiming they were sold defective or illegally altered vehicles. Troy's phone rang again, another furious lender demanding answers. Suddenly, the office lights flickered. The investigator glanced around. You may also want to check your backup systems. It appears someone's been tampering with your electrical infrastructure. Troy's mind raced. Sabotage. But from where? As he shouted for his lawyers, employees began whispering and stepping away from him, unwilling to go down with their sinking ship. Meanwhile, across town, Lydia Morrison was sitting in her glass-walled office at Barton and Pierce Financial Services, oblivious to her family's unraveling, until her assistant rushed in, pale and breathless. Lydia, she gasped, you need to see this. What now? Lydia muttered, scrolling through an influencer's vacation posts. The assistant handed her a printed email, an internal memo marked confidential. Lydia's face drained of color as she read the headline. Investigation launched into fraudulent activity. Departmental review underway. Her name was listed among the flagged employees. No, this has to be a mistake, she whispered, scanning the text. It wasn't. Anonymous tips had flooded the compliance division, outlining her fraudulent bonus schemes, falsified reports, and unauthorized trades. Evidence had been submitted, detailed, irrefutable. Her phone vibrated violently on the desk. It was her boss. Lydia's hand trembled as she answered. Lydia, her manager's voice was like ice. You're to report to the conference room. Immediately. I didn't now. The line went dead. Panic clawed at her chest as she rose shakily from her chair, suddenly aware of the stares from every corner of the office. And across the city, Ryan was dealing with a storm of his own. He sat in a boardroom at Clearpoint Investments, surrounded by senior partners, their expressions dark and unreadable. Mr. Morrison, one of them said, sliding a thick folder across the table. Care to explain these? Ryan opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were screenshots of his unauthorized fund diversions, flagged transactions, and damning email trails, all sent anonymously. This isn't real, he stammered. It's very real, the partner said coldly. Federal authorities have already been alerted. Internal compliance has recommended immediate suspension pending further investigation. Ryan's breath came in short, ragged gasps. But someone set me up. His words fell flat in the cold, heavy room. Phones buzzed. Lawyers were called. In a matter of minutes, his career, everything he had built, began to collapse under the weight of undeniable evidence. And outside their walls, in offices and newsrooms alike, whispers began to swell about the Morrison family, their secrets, and the sudden unraveling of their pristine lives. The web had been spun. Now it was tightening. Chapter 6. Panic and Paranoia. It started as a dull throb beneath their skin, an ache of worry, mild enough to ignore. But within hours, it grew into full-blown panic. Diana paced the marble floors of her now eerily quiet home, her heels clicking like a metronome of dread. The once pristine house was in disarray, papers scattered across tables, unopened letters piling up, voicemails left unchecked but still flashing urgently on the phone. Her cell phone buzzed incessantly, yet every call seemed to bring worse news. Your accounts remain frozen, Mrs. Morrison. We are unable to process your request. Pending further investigation, your personal assets are no longer accessible. Another call. She nearly screamed. She snatched her phone, dialed Troy's number with shaking fingers. Pick up, pick up, pick up. Finally, he answered, his voice hoarse and frantic. Diana, I'm drowning here. You think you're drowning? She hissed, her voice shrill. They've frozen everything. They're threatening to seize the house. My house. Troy let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Your house. They're about to confiscate every car in my lot. I've got customers suing me, regulators breathing down my neck, and he broke off suddenly, swearing under his breath. Hold on. In the background, Diana heard raised voices, lawyers arguing, angry customers shouting. Troy? Troy. He came back on, breathless. This is coordinated, Diana. This isn't random bad luck. Someone's behind this. Diana's heart pounded in her chest. Who would? But the words caught in her throat. Silence stretched between them as the same thought began to dawn in both their minds. Her voice trembled. It couldn't be. Troy's voice dropped low. Jonathan. Diana laughed nervously, though it sounded more like a sob. Don't be ridiculous. He's dying in some rat hole hospital. He's not capable of this. Troy wasn't laughing. You think it's a coincidence? The IRS, state regulators, lawsuits, the media, all at once. Someone with serious pull flipped the switch on us. Diana's lips quivered. Her throat was dry. But he's just sitting there, waiting to die. Troy's reply was like ice. Maybe that's exactly what we wanted to believe. Diana hung up abruptly, her hands shaking as she dialed Lydia next. It rang endlessly before Lydia finally answered, her voice panicked and ragged. Mother, what the hell is going on? Lydia snapped, her voice breaking on the edge of tears. I don't know, Diana hissed. But listen to me. We need to talk about your father. Lydia scoffed bitterly. What about him? I've been stuck in meetings all day. I've got lawyers tearing through my files. I'm on the verge of losing everything. Diana cut her off sharply. Lydia, think. Everything started falling apart right after we dumped him at that nursing home. Lydia went quiet. Diana's voice turned low, urgent. I don't believe in coincidences. He was too calm that day, too accepting. Lydia's breath came shakily through the phone. You think Dad's behind this? I don't know, Diana admitted, glancing around as if the walls themselves might be listening. But I intend to find out. She ended the call before Lydia could say another word. Heart pounding, Diana snatched her car keys and stormed out of the house. The drive to Maple Ridge Extended Care Facility was a blur of red lights and frantic steering. Diana's nails dug into the steering wheel, her mind racing with fragmented memories. Jonathan's quiet stare, his calm nod, his cold acceptance. It felt too easy. When she finally arrived, she didn't bother parking properly. She slammed the car door and marched into the building, her heels striking the tile floor like gunshots. The nurse at the front desk looked up, startled. "I need to see Jonathan Morrison," Diana demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The nurse checked the logbook, unfazed. "Mr. Morrison is resting." Diana leaned over the counter, her voice dripping venom. "Wake him. I'm afraid he's not taking visitors right now." Diana's eyes flared. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The nurse gave her a flat, unimpressed stare. "His ex-wife, according to his records. And regardless of who you are, his medical directive states he's not to be disturbed without permission." Diana's breath caught. "Permission? Yes," the nurse replied calmly. "Mr. Morrison has been very clear. No visitors unless he personally authorizes it. Right now, he's resting. You'll have to wait." Diana's face flushed, a mixture of rage and confusion. She turned away sharply, pulling out her phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed Ryan this time. "Ryan," she barked the moment he answered. "I need you at the nursing home. Now." Ryan sounded half-crazed. "I can't. I'm already under internal investigation. My firm's threatening legal action." "I don't care." Diana snapped. "This is bigger than your job." Ryan's voice dropped, suspicious and bitter. "You think it's him too, don't you?" Diana's silence was all the answer he needed. Ryan swore loudly on the other end. "This doesn't make sense. How the hell could he? He's dying, for God's sake." Diana's voice trembled, cold and tight. "That's exactly what scares me." Before Ryan could reply, she hung up again and called Lydia back. "Meet me here," she ordered. "We're going to get answers." Lydia hesitated. "You really think he—" "Yes." Diana's voice was absolute now, laced with grim certainty. "He's not as helpless as we thought." That evening, they gathered Diana, Lydia, and Ryan outside the locked doors of room 109. They had driven separately, panic clinging to them like a shadow, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes flicking nervously down the quiet, sterile hallways. Inside, they could hear nothing, not a breath, not a sound. Diana glared at the nurse nearby. "We need to see him," she hissed. The nurse only offered a polite, rehearsed smile. "As I told you before, Mr. Morrison is resting comfortably. He's not accepting visitors." Lydia's voice cracked with desperation. We need to speak to him. Please." The nurse's expression didn't change. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "Perhaps another day." Diana clenched her fists, seething, her mind racing with unanswered questions. They moved away from the desk, huddling near the elevators, their voices hushed and frantic. Lydia's voice trembled. What if it is him?" Ryan shook his head, though his face was drenched in panic. "It can't be. He's a dying man. He's powerless." Diana's eyes stayed fixed on the locked door of room 109, her expression hollow with dawning dread. "You forget," she whispered, almost to herself. "He was never powerless." Chapter 7. The trap springs shut. The morning air was thick and humid, heavy with the scent of impending rain. But inside Whitman Prestige Auto, the atmosphere was heavier still. Troy Whitman stormed into his office, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the glass walls. His lawyer, Leonard Marks, trailed after him, sweating profusely and clutching a briefcase. "They're circling like vultures, Troy," Leonard muttered, voice low but urgent. "The regulators, the customers, your employees, this thing's spiraling faster than I can contain it." Troy paced, veins bulging in his neck. "Then unspiral it. That's what I pay you for." Leonard's face tightened. "I've already stalled the consumer fraud suits and delayed the asset seizures. But this latest problem," he pulled out a thick manila folder, sliding it across the desk. "This I can't fix." Troy flipped the folder open, his heart sinking as he read the bold header stamped across the front. DEA Case 7129, B, Narcotics Trafficking and Money Laundering Investigation. His hands froze over the documents inside, photos, surveillance reports, wire transfers. "I don't even deal in this shit," Troy muttered, flipping pages frantically. Doesn't matter, Leonard replied grimly. The evidence says otherwise. Bank records, secret offshore transactions, coded messages between Troy's business accounts and flagged criminal syndicates. It was all there, forged so expertly it looked airtight. They're saying you laundered cartel money through your dealerships, Leonard continued. $20 million worth over the last 3 years. Troy's face went ashen. This is a setup, he breathed, his voice cracking. I believe you, Leonard said quietly. But believing won't stop the DEA. Before Troy could reply, the glass doors to his office burst open. 6 DEA agents flooded in, weapons drawn, badges flashing. Troy Whitman, hands where we can see them, one barked. Troy stumbled back, eyes wide, heart thudding. This is a mistake, hands on the desk. Now, the agents moved fast, slamming him onto the desk, cuffing his wrists behind his back. His face smashed against the cold wood, his pulse roaring in his ears. You're under arrest for conspiracy to traffic narcotics, money laundering, and wire fraud, the lead agent declared. This is bullshit, Troy shouted, struggling. You have the right to remain silent, the agent continued coldly, hauling him to his feet. Troy's employees watched in stunned silence as he was dragged through the showroom in handcuffs, shouting obscenities the whole way. Outside, reporters were already gathered, cameras flashing. The trap had snapped shut. Across town, Diana Morrison was nursing a glass of wine, her nerves frayed to threads, when her phone buzzed with an alert. Her breath hitched when she read the headline. Troy Whitman arrested in DEA sting operation. No, she gasped, nearly dropping her glass. Her phone buzzed again, emails, messages, warnings from her banks about account anomalies. Panic gripped her chest. Frantically, she opened her laptop and logged into her accounts, clicking through hidden pages she thought no one else knew about. Offshore accounts, discreet transfers, emergency stashes of cash carefully tucked away for a day just like this. Her fingers flew over the keys as she tried to move the funds, millions, enough to rebuild somewhere far away. But as soon as she hit transfer, a bright red message appeared on the screen. This account has been flagged under Section 302 of the Anti-Terrorism Financing Act. Her blood ran cold. What is this? She tried again, but the same message blocked her. Suddenly, her phone rang. It wasn't a number she recognized. Heart racing, she answered. A cold, mechanical voice greeted her. Diana Morrison, you have been identified as an entity attempting to launder funds through accounts linked to terrorism financing. Do not attempt to flee. Her vision blurred as dizziness overtook her. This isn't happening, she whispered, shaking her head violently. But the voice continued. Federal agents are en route to your location. No. Before she could shut her laptop, there was a thunderous pounding at her front door. Federal agents. Open up. Diana's breath came in ragged gasps. She stumbled toward the door, barely able to stand. The door crashed open, agents pouring in, their weapons drawn. Diana Morrison, the lead agent shouted, you're under arrest for tax evasion, money laundering, and financing of terrorist organizations. Diana collapsed on her knees, sobbing hysterically as agents cuffed her hands behind her back. This wasn't supposed to happen, she kept muttering over and over. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it was too late. The trap had sprung. Meanwhile, at opposite ends of the city, Lydia and Ryan Morrison were each falling deeper into their own unraveling webs. Lydia sat in her dimly lit apartment, documents spread out everywhere, her laptop open to various encryption tools and VPNs. Her phone calls went unanswered, her lawyers, her former colleagues, even Diana and Troy. Panic clawed at her throat. She opened her private crypto wallet, eyes darting across the screen as she frantically attempted to reroute the funds she had embezzled. Come on, she muttered, typing in fake IDs, transferring through back-end servers. But every time she tried to process the transfer, the system rejected her with the same message. Transaction flagged. Under federal investigation. Lydia's hands trembled. No. Her phone rang. It was Ryan. She answered immediately, her voice frantic. Ryan, We're in deep. They've locked my accounts, everything. I can't move a dime. Ryan's voice was equally panicked. Same here. I've been trying to cover my tracks, but it's like someone's inside my systems already. They're closing in. Lydia's heart pounded. We have to fix this before it's too late. Ryan's breathing was ragged. I know a guy, black market crypto specialist. He can erase digital footprints. I'm calling him now. Do it, Lydia said desperately. Whatever it takes. They hung up, each now scrambling in their separate corners, digging themselves even deeper. Ryan hastily messaged his contact, transferring sensitive files to external drives, deleting emails, shredding records, unaware that every keystroke was being tracked. Lydia followed suit, using underground apps to wipe data, funneling money through unstable crypto networks in the hope of salvaging anything. But in their haste, they bypassed basic precautions, committing a dozen additional felonies in mere hours, unwittingly sealing their fates. Neither noticed the silent watchers monitoring every click. Neither knew that their frantic moves had been anticipated. The trap wasn't just closing. It was already locked. Chapter 8. Total collapse. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled every available space, their cameras flashing like lightning storms as the four defendants were led in, shackled and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. Troy Whitman looked gaunt, his once flashy suits replaced by an orange jumpsuit. His trademark smirk was gone, replaced by hollow, sunken eyes that flicked nervously around the room. Beside him, Diana Morrison sat stiffly, her face drained of color, lips pressed in a tight, bitter line. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled slightly as she gripped the defense table, her hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. Lydia and Ryan sat further down, their faces equally ashen. Both were visibly thinner, their once confident demeanor shattered. Lydia's hands were cuffed, fingers twisting anxiously. Ryan kept glancing toward the exit, as if imagining some last-minute escape. But there was no escape now. The court clerk's voice rang out sharply, silencing the room. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patterson. The crowd stood as the judge entered, an older man with a stern gaze and a reputation for being merciless in white-collar crime cases. He took his seat, eyeing the defendants with a cold detachment. You may be seated. The room settled again. Today's sentencing hearing regards the cases of Troy Whitman, Diana Morrison, Lydia Morrison, and Ryan Morrison. The judge began, his voice echoing through the chamber. Due to the interconnected nature of these crimes, all four cases will be addressed consecutively. Troy's lawyer, a young but overwhelmed defense attorney, rose first, trying to salvage something, anything. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Whitman, maintains his innocence in regard to the narcotics charges, he began, sweat beading on his forehead. He was unaware that his business transactions were linked to criminal organizations. He was set up. The judge held up a hand, silencing him. Enough, Judge Patterson said firmly, lifting a thick file from his bench. Mr. Whitman, you're found guilty by jury trial on all counts. Conspiracy to traffic narcotics, money laundering, wire fraud, and racketeering. Troy's face tightened. The judge continued, unflinching. Overwhelming evidence was presented, bank statements, coded communications, confidential informant testimony. The scope of your crimes extended internationally, posing a significant threat to public safety. He paused. For these crimes, I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Troy's face crumpled. No, this isn't. His voice broke as officers grabbed his arms. Take him away, the judge ordered. Troy struggled, shouting incoherently as he was dragged out, his protests drowned by the noise of the press outside. Diana sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly, breath shallow. The judge turned to her next. Mrs. Morrison, he said coolly, you were found guilty of tax evasion, wire fraud, and, most disturbingly, financing terrorist-linked accounts. Diana didn't speak. She stared straight ahead, face blank. You knowingly attempted to move large sums of money through flag channels to avoid detection. The forensic evidence clearly demonstrated your intent to conceal these funds from both the government and your family's creditors. The judge's tone hardened. Your actions weren't just criminal. They were treasonous under federal financial statutes. He glanced down at his notes. I hereby sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of early release. A murmur spread through the audience as the guards approached her. Diana's composure finally cracked. She let out a low, gasping sob as the cuffs bit into her wrists. This wasn't supposed to happen, she whispered, her voice shaking. We were just protecting ourselves, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. The guards led her away, her sobs echoing down the hallway. Lydia and Ryan sat paralyzed as the judge turned toward them. Lydia Morrison, Ryan Morrison, both siblings tensed, their faces pale as ghosts. You stand before this court convicted of corporate embezzlement, obstruction of justice, securities fraud, and destruction of evidence. Lydia's voice wavered as she tried to speak. Your Honor, please, we were desperate. The judge's gaze was like ice. You weren't desperate, he snapped. You were arrogant. You believed you could steal millions and rewrite your trail with the click of a button. Instead, you left a mountain of digital evidence. He read aloud the key findings from their case: fraudulent trades, falsified documents, deleted emails recovered by forensic investigators, all tying them irrevocably to their crimes. Your reckless attempts to cover your tracks only compounded your guilt, he said coldly. He paused for a long, heavy moment. For your crimes, this court sentences you each to 7 years in federal prison. Lydia let out a sharp, strangled gasp, her hands covering her mouth as tears streamed down her face. No, please, I can't. Ryan sat motionless, his eyes hollow, staring down at the table as if he were already somewhere else entirely. The guards came forward, cuffing both of them as the courtroom buzzed with reporters' frenzied typing and whispered shock. As Lydia and Ryan were led out, the judge made one final remark. Let this be a lesson, he declared, his voice cutting through the noise, that no one, no matter their wealth, status, or connections, is above the law. The gavel came down sharply. Court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy exploded. Every outlet, national, local, international, ran with the same sensational headlines. Morrison family empire collapses in historic legal scandal. Ex-socialite and business mogul Diana Morrison sentenced for terror financing. Prestige auto kingpin Troy Whitman gets life for drug trafficking. Morrison heirs Lydia and Ryan imprisoned in shocking white-collar crime ring. Newscasters dissected every sordid detail, how their greed had brought them down, how their crimes had unraveled so quickly, how their opulent lives had been reduced to cold cells and prison numbers. And yet, through all the coverage, through all the analysis, through every expert panel and think piece column, no one asked the question that mattered most. No one wondered who had pulled the strings. Because to the world, it looked like karma had finally caught up to the Morrisons. But the real mastermind? He remained invisible, exactly as he intended. Chapter 9. The Final Revelation. The soft hum of the room's medical machines was the only sound accompanying Jonathan Morrison's breath. Sunlight filtered weakly through the heavy curtains of his private care suite, casting a muted glow over the modest furnishings, a stark contrast to the opulence he once commanded. Jonathan sat propped against thick pillows, his gaunt frame wrapped in a worn cardigan. The disease had claimed his strength, but not his mind. His eyes, sharp and calculating as ever, fixed on the muted television perched on a corner cabinet. The evening news flickered images of the Morrison family's downfall. Courthouse crowds, flashing cameras, grim headlines. The stories detailed Troy's life sentence, Diana's prison term, Lydia and Ryan's sentencing, all spun into a cautionary tale of greed and corruption. Jonathan allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. A soft knock interrupted his contemplation. Nurse Harris entered quietly, a gentle smile warming her tired eyes. Mr. Morrison, you have a call. Jonathan nodded, his voice raspy but steady. Thank you, Nurse Harris. She handed him the phone and lingered, sensing something in his gaze. He dialed the number with trembling fingers but sure intent. Lydia's voice answered first, sharp and strained. "Hello, Lydia," Jonathan said softly. "It's time we talked." Silence fell heavy on the line. "What do you want, Dad?" Lydia's voice cracked, laced with anger and pain. Jonathan's eyes never left the screen showing the news. "I want you to understand, to truly understand what you and your brother have done." Lydia's breath hitched. "You don't get to play judge now. We were trying to survive." "Survive?" His voice sharpened. "You betrayed me, betrayed the family." On the other end, Ryan's voice joined weakly. "Dad, please, we didn't mean for any of this." Jonathan's gaze hardened. "You never meant to care, did you? All you cared about was what you could take." Lydia's voice trembled. "We needed the money. You left us nothing." Jonathan's hand tightened on the phone. "I gave you everything but loyalty," he said quietly. "You thought I was dying, helpless, but I was watching, planning." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I wanted you to feel the betrayal I felt, the coldness, the abandonment." There was silence, broken only by their ragged breathing. "Why?" Ryan whispered finally. "Why would you do all this?" Jonathan's eyes closed briefly. "Because sometimes the only way to teach is through pain." Lydia sobbed. "Please, Dad, have mercy." Jonathan's reply was a long, heavy silence. He hung up. The room fell into quiet once more. The only sound is shallow breath mingling with the steady beep of the machines. He looked toward the window, a faint smile touching his lips. At last he was at peace. Chapter 10. A Legacy Beyond Revenge. The morning sun seeped softly through the lace curtains of Jonathan Morrison's private care suite, bathing the room in a pale, forgiving light. Outside, the world bustled unaware, news cycles turning, lives carrying on, but inside, time seemed to slow to a near halt. Jonathan lay quietly, his breath shallow yet steady, the sharp edges of pain dulled beneath layers of medication. His once imposing frame was diminished, now fragile as porcelain, yet his eyes remained clear, alight with a calm certainty. Nurse Harris sat nearby, monitoring the machines that tracked the last rhythms of a life drawing to its close. She glanced over, touched by the serenity on his face, a stark contrast to the tempest that had consumed the Morrison family. Jonathan's hand twitched, reaching for the worn leather-bound journal resting on the bedside table. With effort, he clutched the pen beside it, his fingers stiff but determined. His voice, barely above a whisper, broke the silence. To those who forgot, the nurse leaned in closer. His hand moved slowly, each letter traced with reverence and purpose. To those who forgot that loyalty and love are earned through constancy, not convenience. The words, painstakingly penned, were his final testament, not just to his family, but to anyone who might understand the weight of betrayal. Jonathan's gaze drifted toward the window, where a lone bird flitted against the cobalt sky. He pictured the charities, the veterans, the wounded, the forgotten men and women who had sacrificed so much for a country that often forgot them in return. He imagined them receiving what he had left behind, a fortune amassed through years of dedication and service, now freed from the grip of greed and selfishness. His chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, the last vestiges of breath mingling with the cool air. Nurse Harris wiped a tear discreetly, her eyes reflecting the quiet dignity of a man who had fought a battle far beyond what most could see. Later that afternoon, the news broke quietly but unmistakably. Jonathan Morrison had passed away peacefully in his sleep. A man once scorned, abandoned, and betrayed, but in the end the last man standing. At the reading of his will, a surprising revelation stunned the Morrison estate and the media alike. Every penny, every asset, every scrap of wealth Jonathan had accumulated was to be donated, without exception, to military veteran charities across the nation. His final letter was read aloud, resonating with haunting clarity. To those who forgot that loyalty and love are earned through constancy, not convenience, may you find in your solitude the understanding that some betrayals echo through eternity. The press speculated endlessly. Was it vengeance, redemption, or a quiet hope for a better legacy? For Jonathan, It was neither. It was justice in its purest form, a legacy beyond revenge. In the sterile silence of the private suite, where his story had reached its end, the echoes of his life's final message lingered long after his breath had ceased. He was gone, but not defeated. Jonathan Morrison had claimed his victory, not in wealth, not in fame, but in the unyielding truth of his final stand. The story closed on a man who, despite betrayal and death, remained undefeated. A man who taught that even in the face of ruin, honor and purpose endure. And with that, the last page turned.